She bought her seat. She boarded early. She followed every rule. But what happened next would shatter the illusion of dignity in the skies. When a powerful black CEO is quietly removed from her business class seat to make room for a white passenger with influence. She says nothing at first, but behind her, silence is a storm, and what begins as one quiet act of humiliation becomes a national reckoning that changes the airline industry forever. Why did the flight crew target her? Why did no one speak up? And what secret power did she hold that no one on that plane could have imagined? This is not just a story about race. It's about silence, about dignity, about what happens when the quietest passenger becomes the loudest voice in the room. And what she did after landing. Froze careers, rewrote policy, and gave millions their seat back. Are you ready for the flight that changed everything? If this story moves you, hit like, share, and subscribe to follow more powerful stories that challenge injustice and uplift quiet heroes. Now, let's board this unforgettable journey. The boarding call came gently over the airport speakers, almost like a whisper tucked beneath the hum of morning travel. Flight 408 direct from San Diego to Washington, D.C., now boarding all business class passengers. Celina Hart didn't rush. She never did. She stood slowly from her seat near gate C-17, brushed invisible lint from her gray wool coat, and adjusted the strap of her leather tote. Her heels were modest, low, the kind favored by women who had no need to impress, only to move with purpose. A flight attendant glanced at her boarding pass as she stepped forward. Her name, printed in neat black letters, sat above a barcode and a bold number, 2A, business class, window seat. She didn't need directions. She'd sat there before on this airline, on this aircraft type, on this exact route. The seat was familiar. Like many things in her life, it had been claimed through earned silence and persistent grace. The cabin door opened with a soft metallic click. She stepped onto the jetway. The air changed, cooler. There was always a stillness just before stepping onto a plane. It reminded her of boardrooms, of being watched but not welcomed. Inside. She offered a quiet smile to the flight attendant at the door and turned left. 2 rows in. She found her seat. 2A. She placed her tote carefully beneath the seat in front of her, then settled into the smooth leather, her coat draped neatly across her lap, sunglasses still on, her expression unreadable. The plane wasn't full yet, but it would be. As she closed her eyes briefly, savoring a breath of calm, the cabin shifted. A man's voice broke the quiet, loud, clipped, authoritative. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm going to need you to step out of that seat." Celina opened her eyes. Standing before her was a man in a navy blazer with an airline badge clipped to his lapel. He wasn't smiling. Passengers nearby turned their heads, just slightly, enough to signal they'd heard him. The man didn't flinch. His voice didn't lower. "I'm sorry, but this seat has been reassigned. We'll need you to move to the rear cabin." Celina tilted her head gently, unbothered. She reached into the side pocket of her coat and pulled out a crisp boarding pass. 2A, Celina Hart. Evolve, capital tier, confirmed. She extended it with quiet confidence. "This seat was assigned to me. It's a confirmed business class ticket under my corporate priority." The man didn't even glance at the pass. "I understand, but a priority guest requires this seat. There must have been a mismatch in the system." Celina didn't blink. There is no mismatch. At that moment, another uniformed woman stepped forward. Mid-30s, blonde, tight bun. Supervisor tag, Linda Crowley. She gave a tight, managerial smile, the kind that always arrived just before a bad decision. Miss Hart, I'm sure this is a frustrating inconvenience. Unfortunately, you've been reassigned to seat 23B. It's just a few rows back. Celina took a breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask why. She simply stood, not fast, not flustered, just stood. She picked up her tote, adjusted her coat, and the cabin felt it. An energy shift so slight, only the people who'd lived a lifetime of being second-guessed could feel it. Linda stepped aside. The man in the navy blazer, still nameless, nodded curtly. From the rear of the plane, a white man in a tailored suit stepped forward. Brandon Keene, investment partner, tall, smug, entitled. He took seat 2A like it had always belonged to him. Celina walked past him without turning her head. No one clapped, no one spoke up, but someone was recording. In row 4, a young black woman named Imani Fields had her phone resting in her lap. Record light on. Her caption already typed. Black woman removed from business class for white man. No explanation, no apology. Celina arrived at seat 23B. It was a middle seat, near the lavatory, between a man eating trail mix and a teenager wearing headphones. A young male passenger, maybe 22, moved to let her in. He looked nervous. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. That wasn't right." Celina nodded politely, sat down, smoothed her coat, tucked her tote below. She didn't speak. She reached into the side pocket and pulled out a black phone. No glitter, no designer case. The screen was cracked. One contact appeared, the letter M. She tapped it, a pause. Then softly clause 17. Quiet mode. Notify Miles. She ended the call, didn't even blink. At the front of the plane, Linda returned to her post, smiling again, relieved. She thought it was over. She was wrong. Back in 23B, Celina adjusted her posture, her back straight, her breath even, her fingers folded lightly in her lap, and behind her glasses, her eyes were wide open. The flight crew didn't know it. The man in 2A didn't know it. Even the passengers watching in silence didn't know it. But something had shifted. Not just a seat, but the center of gravity. The engine hum had barely steadied when Imani Fields realized she'd captured something no one else had. She sat in a seat 4D, just behind business class, window side. Her phone was tilted slightly against her thigh, still recording. Not because she intended to, but because her instincts told her something was off the moment that woman, quiet, graceful, maybe in her 40s, was told to move without reason. Imani didn't work for the media. Not yet. But she studied journalism at Howard. This flight was supposed to be a quick trip back after presenting at a youth journalism summit in San Diego. She hadn't expected to be documenting history before takeoff. The video on her screen was short but unmistakable. A poised black woman. No fuss, no protest. A boarding pass in her hand. A man in uniform brushing it aside like lint on a sleeve. Another woman, blonde and tight-lipped, reinforcing the lie with a customer service smile. And then, the replacement. A white man in a gray suit gliding into 2A as if it were built for him. Imani tapped save, then upload. She typed the caption, "Black woman removed from business class for white man." No explanation, no apology. She paused, added a hashtag. Still happening, sitting in row 23, Celina Hart hadn't moved since sitting down. She hadn't adjusted her tray, hadn't pulled out her tablet, hadn't even removed her sunglasses. She simply existed, perfectly still, like a mountain in the middle of turbulence. Amani glanced back toward her. The calmness of the woman unsettled her, not because it looked fake, but because it looked practiced, like a muscle memory from too many other rooms, too many boardrooms, too many moments where standing up for yourself meant risking everything. Amani leaned slightly to her seatmate, a soft-spoken woman with a baby in her arms. "Did you see what just happened?" The woman nodded but didn't speak. Imani took a breath. She tapped the screen again. The views were rising. 1,200, 1,800, 3,000. People were watching now. She typed a second caption. "Who is she?" A few rows up, the man in 2A, Brandon Keene, sipped from a glass of sparkling water and scrolled his phone. He had no idea a storm was circling him in silence. He leaned toward the attendant and asked, loudly, for another towel. The blonde flight supervisor, Linda Crowley, responded with a smile. "Certainly, Mr. Keene," right away, behind her. The younger attendant, Kelsey Raymond, looked uneasy. She hadn't said much since the boarding confusion. She hadn't even made eye contact with the woman they moved to the back. She felt it in her stomach something wasn't right. But she told herself, "I was just following the supervisor's lead." That excuse had lived a long time in a lot of uniforms. Linda came back with the towel. Brandon barely acknowledged her. Down in 23B, Celina opened her eyes. She didn't look around. She didn't reach for her phone again. Instead, she simply sat. There was a slow, deliberate breath. Then she reached into her tote and pulled out a leather-bound notepad, the kind executives use when they still believe in pen and paper. She clicked a thin gold pen, and she wrote something. Just a few words. No one could see them. No one needed to. Because the power wasn't in what she wrote. It was in the way she did it. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. She was preparing for something, and whatever it was, it didn't need volume, only clarity. Back near the cockpit, Tomas Gutierrez adjusted the edge of the service cart. He was in his late 40s, salt and pepper hair, and a quiet way of moving through tight spaces. He'd worked flights for over 20 years. He'd seen everything. Medical emergencies, celebrity tantrums, even an in-flight proposal that turned into a mid-air breakup. But this was different. He saw it all happen during boarding. The dismissal, the silence, the woman's face. Thomas had grown up in El Paso. His mother worked nights as a cleaner at a regional airport. He'd been taught to be polite, helpful, invisible if necessary, but he had also been taught to recognize dignity, and Celina Hart radiated it. He hadn't spoken to her yet, not directly, but something told him he would. And when he did, it wouldn't be small talk. He reached toward the intercom, then hesitated. What would he even say? "I think we humiliated someone who might be important." No, this was beyond rank or fame. This was about something else entirely. He returned to the cart and quietly started preparing the drink orders. Back in 4D, Amani tapped her phone again. Her video had passed 12,000 views. Comments poured in. She handled that with class. Why didn't anyone speak up? That was racism, clear and cold. I think I've seen her before. Is she the evolved capital woman? That last comment made Amani stop. She opened a new tab, typed slowly, "Evolve Capital CEO, Black Woman Glasses, San Diego," Results poured in, articles, interviews, one Forbes profile. There she was. Celina Hart, founder and CEO of Evolve Capital, estimated net worth $850 million, major investor in Horizon Jet Lines. Amani's eyes widened. She turned to the woman with the baby again. She owns part of this airline. The woman looked confused. Amani pointed gently toward row 23. They bumped a partner out of her own seat. From across the aisle, a man in a business suit leaned closer. "Did you say Evolve Capital?" Amani nodded. He frowned, pulled out his tablet. "Damn. I was just at their partner summit last quarter. They own the jet leasing rights on this aircraft." In the cockpit, the captain's headset buzzed. He glanced at his dashboard. A red notification appeared. "Evolve, Tier 0, passenger, confirmed do not deplane. Without instruction contact. Executive ops before landing." He blinked, then turned to his co-pilot. "You ever seen this protocol before?" The co-pilot shook his head. "No, but I think we're in for something." Back in 23B, Celina wrote one more line. Then she folded the notepad and tucked it away. Her phone buzzed. A message from Miles Hart. "Confirmed they bumped you for Brandon Keene. He's part of the pending acquisition deal. Should I escalate?" She replied with 2 words, "Not yet." Then she sat back, closed her eyes, and waited. She had no intention of rushing. The world had taken her seat. Now it could take a moment to understand who she was. The seat was narrow. Celina noticed it the way one notices a stone in a shoe. Not painful, just present. Seat 23B wasn't built for comfort. It was tucked between a young man with too much cologne and an elderly woman asleep with her mouth open. There was no armrest left, no silence either. A crying baby somewhere behind her kept time with the dull thump of turbulence against the wing. Still, she didn't move. She didn't shift or sigh or blink too long. Her stillness was deliberate, the kind learned in boardrooms when being the only woman meant carrying every question with an answer. She glanced down at her phone again. The screen showed no new notifications. That was good. It meant her team was following protocol. Clause 17 was already in motion. Quiet escalation, no press, no premature statements, just observation and documentation. It was always better to let the system reveal itself before you broke it open. Celina tucked the phone back into her tote. A part of her wanted to be angry, not because of the seat. She could sit anywhere. She had spent nights on train station benches in Detroit at 16. A middle seat in economy was not the insult. It was the assumption behind it. The assumption that her presence was a mistake, that someone like her didn't belong unless she wore a badge or a label or carried a briefcase with gold trim. She closed her eyes. Her mind went back to that first deal, the one that changed everything. She was 28, sitting across from 3 men in tailored suits who thought she was the assistant. They never once asked her name, just handed her coffee and asked when Mr. Hart would be joining. She remembered nodding slowly, smiling, and then taking out the binder with the acquisition documents bearing her name. The room went quiet, just like this cabin now. She had learned then what she was still proving now. Power did not need to announce itself. It needed only to be present long enough for the silence to recognize it. A voice broke her thoughts. "Would you care for something to drink?" Ma'am Tomas Gutierrez stood beside her with a cart. His voice was gentle, measured. Celina looked up, studying him for a second longer than most would. He wasn't avoiding her eyes. That mattered. She offered a small nod. "Just water. no ice. He poured it himself, handed it to her with both hands. She accepted it without a word. Before he turned away, he leaned down slightly, quiet enough that only she could hear. "Ma'am, I saw what happened earlier. That was not okay." She didn't respond immediately, but when she did, her voice was soft. "Thank you." Then she paused. "You might want to be near the front when we land." He blinked. A beat passed, then he nodded, just once. She watched him walk away. Every movement in the cabin felt louder now, the hum of suspicion, the static of recognition. Someone in 17A was whispering. Another passenger, 2 rows up, was texting furiously. And still, the man in 2A sipped champagne like nothing was wrong. Brandon Keene had not once looked back, not once acknowledged the woman whose seat he now occupied. The man carried his entitlement like a cologne, dense, invisible, and offensive. He was talking now, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I told them I needed to be rested before the meetings in D.C. You know how these flights go. Priorities." The flight attendant beside him, Kelsey Raymond, laughed nervously. "Yes, sir. We try to accommodate our valued guests." Brandon smirked. "Good. This airline owes me at least that, especially if that merger goes through." From her seat, Celina didn't look up, but she heard every word. The merger. So that was it. Brandon wasn't just any passenger. He was part of the pending acquisition deal. Evolve Capital was facilitating. A last-minute addition to the manifest. A potential partner. And apparently, someone had decided that Celina Hart could be quietly displaced to keep him comfortable. She took another sip of water. The irony was clean. Sharp. She was financing the very plane they were flying. The deal she had orchestrated was the reason Horizon Jet Lines had kept its head above water this year, and now they were trying to push her below the surface again. She tapped her phone once more, scrolled. There was already chatter online, a video, live-streamed, Imani Fields. She didn't know the girl, but she recognized the courage. The angle was clear enough, the voice steady. Her caption had gained traction. They removed a black woman from business class for a white man. No cause, no apology. Comments were piling up. "Who is she?" that looked intentional. She didn't even argue. "That's what got me." "Wait, is that Celina Hart?" The recognition was spreading. Celina's fingers hovered over her screen. One message, just one. She could blow this open now. But that wasn't the way. Not yet. She closed the screen, slipped the phone back into her tote. Across the aisle, a man with silver hair whispered something to his wife. "She looks familiar. Didn't she keynote at the investment conference last year?" His wife shook her head. "I don't know, but I've never seen someone sit that still with that much purpose." Back in the galley, Tomas looked at the manifest. Seat 2A, originally assigned to C, Hart. Seat 23B, now labeled miscellaneous reassignment. His gut twisted. He pulled out his small crew tablet and checked the back-end logs. Flight financing partners, operational codes, Evolve Capital. His eyebrows rose. Then the words appeared in bold beneath it. Priority Tier 0. He swallowed hard. He had never seen that before. Never. He looked up. The aisle stretched ahead of him. Seat 23B, a woman, a force. He picked up the intercom, considered making a call to the captain, then stopped. No, whatever was coming, it was already in motion. All he could do now was prepare for landing, and for the reckoning that might come with it. Back in 23B. Celina leaned her head back against the seat, closed her eyes once more. But she was not resting. She was calculating, preparing, choosing, because when the wheels hit the ground, she wouldn't be the one shaking. Flight 408 had leveled off at cruising altitude, 36,000 feet above sea level. The world below was nothing but mist and distance. But inside the cabin, something thick was hanging in the air. Not just pressure, not just recycled oxygen, tension. It settled into every row like condensation on a cold window. Celina Hart didn't need to see the looks. She could feel them. The sideways glances, the stolen whispers, the quiet clicks of thumbs on phones. From her middle seat in row 23, she kept her gaze soft, forward, unmoving. The silence inside her had been trained, sharpened over years of being overlooked, underestimated, misjudged, misnamed. The silence was armor, and right now she wore it like silk. But beneath that calm, her thoughts moved quickly. This wasn't just a misstep. This was a decision. Someone on this flight had looked at the manifest and decided her name wasn't enough. They saw Hart and didn't connect it with Evolve Capital. Didn't connect it with the legal structure that held 20% of Horizon Jet Lines' aircraft. They didn't recognize the woman financing their flight. And that was the real offense, not the seat, the assumption that she didn't belong. Celina's phone vibrated once, no alert sound. She had disabled everything the moment she was reassigned. The screen lit briefly. It was a secure message from Miles. Confirmed, Brandon Keene added to manifest 2 hours before boarding. You were bumped manually. System didn't do it. People did. She read it, then read it again. The answer was worse than she thought. They had changed it on purpose. She tapped the screen twice. Understood. Proceed with parallel clause review. No outreach to press yet. Let them arrive first. She put the phone away again, and then, for a moment, she let herself feel it. Not anger, not even frustration. Something older. Grief. Grief for the 100 other flights where someone else was moved without cause. For the girl who once sat on a Greyhound bus with $53 in a coat pocket and still got asked if the seat next to her was taken. For the woman who made her first million before 30, but was still mistaken for catering staff at a partner's gala. Grief for how often dignity had to be earned twice when it should have never been questioned once. She took a breath, let it settle, then slowly sat up straighter. This wasn't about grief anymore. This was about governance. 3 rows ahead, Brandon Keene laughed again. His voice echoed across business class like a bell without a song. He was talking loudly to a man across the aisle. Honestly, I don't know why they let those lower-tier passengers book so close to the front. It messes up everything. I mean, it's business class for a reason. Linda Crowley walked past just then and chuckled lightly. Not because she agreed, but because she had trained herself to stay inside the good graces of men like him. Celina didn't move, but she heard every word. Thomas stood in the galley. He had just refreshed the hot towel stack but couldn't keep his eyes from drifting toward the forward aisle. He had overheard Brandon, too. And, though protocol said nothing about recording cabin conversations, he had started a note in his own tablet. Timestamps, tone, key phrases. He wasn't sure why, only that something inside him told him to do it. Near the cockpit, Captain Avery Miles removed his headset. He was 53, a veteran pilot, 15,000 flight hours logged, and for the first time in years, he felt uneasy. The red notification was still there. Evolve Capital. Tier 0 presence confirmed. Hold until contact from Executive Ops. He didn't know who Celina Hart was, but he was starting to understand who she might be. He turned to his co-pilot, a younger man named Derek. Run a quiet check on the aircraft lease. Who financed this plane? Derek frowned, but complied. His fingers tapped the onboard console. A few seconds passed. Then the answer blinked in white text on a black screen. Asset, lease, Evolve Capital Holdings. Captain Miles closed his eyes. Lord help us, he whispered. He looked down the manifest. Celina M. Hart. She hadn't caused a scene, hadn't raised her voice, but if his instincts were right, she didn't need to. She had already pulled a thread, and if the airline didn't respond quickly, the whole system might unravel. Back in economy, a teenager, 3 seats behind Celina, opened TikTok. He saw Imani Fields' video on his For You page. He watched it twice, then turned to his friend and said, "Yo, that's the lady in 23B. His friend whispered, "You sure?" The teenager tilted his phone to show the paused frame. Celina, boarding pass in hand, sunglasses on, voice calm. "I'm sure," he said. The video had already hit 22,000 views, and climbing. Imani refreshed her phone. The notifications wouldn't stop. People had started tagging her in stories. She's the CEO of Evolve. This is going to explode. She just sat down like a queen. You could feel it. They messed with the wrong woman. Imani's fingers hovered over the post button. She had a second video, the one where Brandon walked in and sat down without even glancing around. She uploaded it, added a caption. This is who they gave her seat to. She didn't write anything else. She didn't have to. The world would fill in the rest. In 23B, Celina adjusted the strap on her tote. She was counting. Minutes, moves, choices. She had grown up in chaos, learned how to predict people's next decisions before they made them, and right now she knew exactly what was coming. Linda would think she had handled the situation. Brandon would keep talking until the landing. The airline would try to apologize. Later, softly, with plausible deniability, but by then it would be too late. Because Celina wasn't just a passenger, she was a test, and the system had failed. At 36,000 feet, where no one could run or hide, they had exposed themselves. Now, she would do what she had done in every other room where people tried to shrink her. She would take notes, and then she would take control. The first sign that something was shifting came just as the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Washington, D.C. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts." It was standard, routine, but it carried an unfamiliar tension this time, like the words had to push through something heavier than air. Celina Hart reached down and adjusted her seatbelt. Smooth motion, no hurry. She wasn't afraid of turbulence. She had lived through worse storms. Tomas Gutierrez stood near the galley, watching passengers buckle up, but his eyes kept drifting toward row 23. He hadn't said anything more to her, but her warning still rang in his ears. "You might want to be near the front when we land." The way she said it, calm, certain. No threat, just inevitability. He had seen a lot in 20 years of flying, but never a passenger sit in silence with that much gravity. He moved up the aisle slowly, checking seat belts, greeting passengers. He paused when he reached her row. "Ma'am," he said quietly, Would you like anything else before we land? Celina looked up, just her eyes. Her voice was soft. No, thank you, but you may want to have your crew manifest ready. Thomas nodded, not asking questions. He continued forward, heart thudding against his ribs. In row 2, Brandon Keene was on the phone again, this time whispering but still audible. Yeah, I got the seat. They bumped someone. I don't know who. Doesn't matter. Just make sure the car's at the gate, and have the briefing ready. He hung up with a smirk and stretched his legs. Linda Crowley passed by and smiled at him. Everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Keene. He nodded. Always. You guys really know how to treat priority flyers. Linda straightened. The compliment tasted good. She needed it after the tension earlier. She assumed the situation with the reassigned woman was forgotten. If she had known what was coming, she might have chosen her words more carefully. In seat 4D, Amani Fields checked her phone. The numbers were climbing faster now. Her original video had passed 30,000 views. Her second video, the one showing Brandon slipping into the reassigned seat, had gone viral. People were commenting in real time. She's the CEO of Evolve Capital. This is not going to end well for that crew. I cannot believe she was that calm. That's real power. The silence is louder than a lawsuit. Amani refreshed again, then noticed something new, a repost from a verified account. Miles Hart. She clicked it, a photo of Celina on a conference stage. Caption, let them land. She'll do the rest. Amani's mouth opened slightly. She turned to the woman next to her. That's her brother. He just shared it. The woman blinked, shared what Amani turned the screen. The video, the post, the name. The woman's face changed. That's the woman they moved. Amani nodded. The woman swallowed. Oh, God. Back in the cockpit, Captain Avery Miles adjusted his headset. He had received 3 silent alerts since entering descent. One from the airline's legal department, one from executive operations, and one from the FAA, all with a simple instruction. Do not deplane until confirmation from board relations. That had never happened before. He turned to his co-pilot, Derek. Something is happening back there. Stay sharp. Derek glanced down the aisle and nodded. In the cabin. Thomas had reached the front. He leaned into Linda. Hey, he whispered, do we have the full manifest printed? We may need to verify some things on arrival. Linda frowned. Why, everything's handled. The passenger in 23B hasn't made any complaints. Thomas hesitated. She doesn't need to. She made a call. I heard her say a clause was activated. Her name's Hart. Linda blinked. Hart. Thomas nodded. Celina Hart. Linda went pale. She took a step back, then pulled her phone from her pocket, searched quickly. The first result was a business magazine article. Celina M. Hart, the quiet force behind Evolve Capital. Linda's hand shook slightly. She turned toward Kelsey Raymond, who had been quietly restocking cups. Get to the galley, Linda whispered. Now. Kelsey obeyed without hesitation. Inside the galley. Linda closed the curtain and stared at her screen. This wasn't just a passenger. This was a partner, a major one, possibly with enough stake to force a compliance review. Thomas stood just outside the curtain, waiting. Linda stepped out. We may have a problem, she said under her breath. Thomas didn't answer. He already knew. In 23B, Celina opened her notepad again. She wrote one final line. Post-landing initiate public clause C9 if no internal outreach is made within 15 minutes. She closed the pad, checked her watch, then leaned back. The descent had begun. But for her, the landing was already in motion. All that remained now was the arrival and the reckoning. The plane touched down with a soft bump, one tire after the other, the way seasoned pilots liked it. Smooth, precise, unremarkable, but inside the cabin of Flight 408 nothing was smooth, and nothing was ordinary. No one applauded. No one stood up. The silence was louder than turbulence. Seat belts remained fastened. Bags stayed tucked beneath seats. It was as if the entire plane had decided, all at once, to hold its breath. Celina Hart didn't move. She remained seated in 23B, hands resting on her lap, her notepad closed, her tote upright and zipped. Her posture hadn't changed since the wheels touched ground. She had landed planes like this before, not from the cockpit, but from the boardroom. And this time, she was bringing the cockpit to her courtroom. Ahead, the man in the seat 2A checked his watch. Brandon Keene had noticed the shift, even if he couldn't name it. Something about the energy behind him felt different, less forgiving, more watchful. He pulled at his collar and peered behind him, catching a few stares, one camera phone, and a flight attendant who refused to meet his eye. He turned back, annoyed. "What's the holdup in the galley?" Linda Crowley tapped the intercom, about to deliver the usual cheerful speech. "Thank you for flying. Please remain seated. Welcome to Washington, D.C." But before her thumb touched the button, the cockpit door opened. Captain Avery Miles stepped out. He looked like someone who had just been handed a resignation letter and an audit report in the same breath. He walked straight down the aisle, past first class, past the front galley, past row 10, past 17. Passengers watched him the way animals watch a change in the wind. When he stopped beside row 23, all eyes turned. Celina looked up, expression calm. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Hart," he said. She gave a small nod. "Yes, Captain. I'd like to personally apologize for." She raised her hand gently. "No apologies yet. Not until you've spoken to your board." The captain blinked, then nodded once. "Of course." He turned and walked back to the front, his steps slightly less steady. In the back row, a teenager whispered to his friend, "Did you see that the captain just came to her seat?" His friend whispered back, "He looked like he saw a ghost." At the front of the aircraft, the jet bridge had not been attached. The gate agent stared at the flashing message on her screen. "Hold all boarding bridges. Priority escort inbound. Do not deplane without executive clearance." She had never seen that instruction before. She tapped again. Same message. Then a second one. "Passenger 23B is not to be disturbed. Compliance alert flagged." She swallowed hard. Out on the tarmac, a black town car had just pulled to a stop. The driver remained in place, but a woman in a navy suit stepped out, phone to her ear, badge clipped to her waist. She was not from TSA. Behind her, two men in tailored gray jackets followed. No logos, no names, just presence. They weren't there to detain anyone. They were there to witness. Inside the plane, Tomas Gutierrez stood at the front galley, watching the gate door remain shut. His hands were folded in front of him. His eyes were fixed on the aisle. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew it would be remembered. Linda turned to him. "What is going on?" Tomas didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, "They haven't opened the door. That's not a delay. That's a decision. In row 4, Amani Fields refreshed her video. 89,000 views. The comments were now coming faster than she could read. She owns part of the airline. The captain apologized to her personally. This is going to be in headlines tomorrow. Amani's phone buzzed again. A DM request from a journalist. Then another. Then 3 more. Someone tweeted the video with a new caption. The woman they pushed to 23B just grounded an entire crew without speaking a word. In 23B, Celina finally moved. She reached down and slowly removed her phone. She checked the screen. A single text. Gate cleared. Waiting for your signal. Legal, press, and compliance are on standby. She typed back, hold press, deploy legal first. Walkout begins in 5. She stood, carefully. She didn't rush, didn't adjust her coat, didn't scan the cabin. She simply stood and began walking forward. The aisle made space for her without request, like water around a ship. She passed row after row. People stared. Some nodded quietly. One whispered, "Thank you." Celina didn't acknowledge them. Not because she was ignoring them, because she had already done this walk hundreds of times in places no one had ever thanked her. When she reached the front, Linda stepped aside. Celina paused. Her eyes met Linda's. "You'll want to check your inbox," Celina said. Her voice wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was deliberate. Linda opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Celina turned and stepped through the open doorway and into the jet bridge. No cameras, no reporters, no greetings, just the woman in the Navy suit, phone still to her ear, who ended the call as Celina approached. "Ms. Hart," she said, voice respectful. "Everything is ready." Celina nodded once. "Let's begin." Behind her, the cabin remained frozen. No one had moved. The passengers sat with belongings in hand. Seatbelts long unfastened, but no one willing to rise, because something had just shifted in that space. Something deeper than turbulence. A woman had stood, and everything else sat down. The door closed behind her with a quiet hiss. The cabin faded into silence. Ahead, the jet bridge stretched out like a tunnel between what had happened and what was about to begin. Celina Hart took a single step forward. She did not walk quickly. She did not look back. Her heels tapped lightly against the textured flooring, each step measured, unbothered, certain. At the end of the bridge, 3 people waited. The first was Naomi Chen, Director of Corporate Compliance for Horizon Jet Lines, a woman known for her poise, her ruthless efficiency, and her love of managing problems before they reached the media. This time, she had not managed fast enough. Next to her stood Greg Maddox, General Counsel, holding a manila folder so tightly the edges had bent. He had been on vacation 36 hours ago. Now he looked like a man summoned to court with his own signature on the subpoena. The third was silent. A tall man in a gray jacket. No identification, no introductions. He was not from the airline. He was not from Celina's team. He was here to make sure that what happened next was documented. Celina stopped 1 pace from them. Naomi straightened her spine and offered a tight smile. "Ms. Hart, welcome to Washington. The board is aware of the incident. They've asked if you would prefer to address the matter via conference call or in person." Celina didn't blink. In person. Manhattan office. 15 minutes. Greg cleared his throat. "We can arrange a car, a security escort if needed." "No need," Celina replied. "My own vehicle is waiting. but I will require the following before departure: your full crew manifest, unedited security footage from Gate C-17 and the flight's internal communication logs from 30 minutes before boarding to 30 minutes after takeoff. Hard copy and digital. Naomi nodded once. Understood. I also want certification documentation for every customer-facing employee on this flight. Celina added, her voice calm. I'll review their training records myself. Greg shifted uncomfortably. Of course, he said. We'll have everything prepared by the time you reach HQ. Celina offered no thanks. She turned slightly, eyes drifting toward the fuselage of the plane, now sealed behind the closed door. Inside, the crew remained, some standing, some seated, all waiting. She looked back at Naomi. I expect no interaction with the press until I give the signal. Naomi hesitated. There are already camera crews outside. Celina turned toward the gate door, not slowing, then clear the perimeter. I don't want a single camera lens pointed at that jet until I say otherwise. Naomi signaled to a security agent nearby. Within seconds, the hallway was swept. Celina continued walking. As she reached the base of the jet bridge, the black town car came into view. Her driver opened the rear door, nodded once, and waited. Behind her, the door opened again. Footsteps echoed. Philip Raleigh stepped out first. His blazer was askew, his face pale. He opened his mouth to speak. Celina raised her hand without turning. Not now. Her tone wasn't angry. It was surgical. He froze mid-sentence, stepped back. Behind him came Linda Crowley. Her posture had collapsed in the space between touchdown and reality. She looked less like a supervisor and more like a student arriving late to detention. Kelsey Raymond followed. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. The attempt to appear composed had failed. She looked 19 again, not the 26-year-old flight attendant who had smiled her way through discomfort. Celina turned fully. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She simply looked at them. You'll receive formal documentation within the hour, she said. Neither of them replied. I suggest you read it carefully, Celina continued, before deciding how you wish to respond. Still, no words came, just nods, eyes lowered, silence thick enough to slow the air. Celina stepped into the car without another glance. The door shut softly. The vehicle pulled away, back inside the terminal. Naomi exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Greg loosened his tie and mumbled, This isn't a PR issue. This is a structural failure. Naomi didn't respond. She just watched the town car disappear into the traffic, carrying with it the woman they had tried to dismiss. They thought they'd reassigned a seat. Instead, they'd reassigned authority. In the back of the plane, passengers began to move, uncertainly at first, as if waiting for permission. Zippers opened, overhead bins clicked. In 4D, Imani Fields closed her phone with trembling hands. She hadn't recorded Celina's exit, not because she forgot, because she understood. There were moments that didn't need cameras, they needed memory. She turned to the older woman beside her. Do you think they're really going to fire the crew? The woman shook her head slowly. I think something bigger just got started. Imani looked back toward row 23. The seat was empty now, but the weight of it remained. She tapped the screen on her phone one last time and typed. She didn't just move a seat. She moved the standard. The comment section exploded. At Horizon's Manhattan headquarters, the boardroom lights were already on. A meeting had been called for 10 o'clock sharp. No remote dial-ins, no executive summaries. in person only. 12 seats, 10 already filled. The 11th was Greg Maddox, who entered with the look of a man walking into confession. The 12th was empty. Until Celina arrived, she didn't pause at the threshold, didn't wait for anyone to stand. She walked the full length of the table, quiet heels against soft carpet, gray wool coat still buttoned, tote slung over one arm. At the head of the table, she placed a single folder and said nothing. Not yet. She didn't need to, because they were already listening. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city below, filtering through the windows like background static. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with the rhythm of mid-morning traffic. But inside the boardroom of Horizon Jet Lines, time was waiting on one woman to speak. Celina Hart stood at the head of the table. 12 board members sat before her. Their faces were a mix of discomfort, curiosity, and something else they weren't used to feeling: accountability. She didn't sit. She opened the folder slowly and slid the first document across the table. Shareholder agreement, she said calmly. Section 9B, the ownership clause. The legal counsel leaned forward instinctively. Celina looked around the table. Her tone never changed. She wasn't performing. She was simply delivering the terms. Evolve Capital currently holds an 18.7% equity stake in Horizon Jet Lines. That includes direct shares and strategic lease partnerships. The plane I flew on this morning was financed under that agreement. She paused. Per clause 9B, any breach of contract involving customer discrimination, reputational risk, or operational misconduct grants immediate review authority to the named shareholder. She tapped the line with a single finger. My name is on that clause. No one spoke. Celina slid the next sheet forward. This is the manifest from Flight 408. It shows my seat assignment was altered manually. Not system error, manual override. By gate supervisor Philip Raleigh, on request from a Mr. Brandon Keene. One of the board members adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Ms. Hart, we deeply regret she held up her hand. Not rude, not abrupt, just decisive. This is not the apology portion of the meeting, she said. That comes later, if earned. She tapped again. This is the decision portion. She plugged a small drive into the embedded screen at the center of the table. A video played, security footage from the gate. Celina standing patiently, boarding pass in hand. Philip Raleigh gesturing her aside, not once looking at her ticket. Another camera angle. Brandon arriving late, ushered past the line. Linda Crowley smiling, pointing toward the seat 2A, mute footage. But no one in the room needed sound. The image was loud enough. Celina spoke again. This isn't about optics. It's about standards. You tried to sell Horizon to investors as a forward-facing airline. Inclusive, efficient, accountable. She glanced at Naomi, then back at the board. That's not what happened yesterday, and what happened to me is not unique. It happens every day. The only difference is today. I'm the one who walked off the plane with your contract in my bag. The tension in the room thickened. No one interrupted her now. She pulled out another sheet, held it in the air briefly before laying it flat. This is a prepared resolution. If passed today, it allows Evolve Capital to appoint a temporary compliance executive to oversee personnel restructuring, anti-bias training, and public accountability systems within Horizon's Passenger Services Division. A woman on the board leaned forward. I assume you've already chosen this officer. Celina smiled for the first time. It wasn't smug. It wasn't even satisfied. It was simply clear. Yes, me. The room went quiet again. Greg Maddox finally spoke, voice tight. This level of intervention is unconventional. It could trigger instability with shareholders, the union, the press. Celina nodded slowly. Then you should prepare them for change. Another board member leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. And what if we decline the resolution? She didn't blink. Then Evolve Capital will file an immediate motion to dissolve our financing agreements, sell off active leases, and trigger breach clauses across 6 regional partnerships. That would collapse 70% of your operating fleet. The words weren't said with threat. They were said with fact. The silence in the room grew stiller, like the space between lightning and thunder. No one responded, until Naomi spoke. She had been quiet the entire meeting, watching Celina the way someone watches a storm roll in from the sea. Now she leaned forward, voice soft. She owns the plane, and we treated her like a problem. The acknowledgement broke the dam. One by one, board members murmured their agreement. Greg reached for a pen. The resolution will be reviewed and voted on today. Celina folded her arms. No, it will be voted on now. Someone started to protest, but she had already opened her laptop and mirrored it to the screen. Slide 1 appeared. Immediate dismissals names, titles. Flight 408 crew list. Slide 2, compliance timeline. 30 days, full anti-bias recertification, no exceptions. Slide 3, compensation policy update. 20% of all executive bonuses tied to performance and equity, diversity, and passenger satisfaction metrics. Independent auditing required. Slide 4, public statement. Not from the PR team, not through marketing. I'll write it myself, Celina said, and it will come from the CEO. Signed with a name. Another beat passed. Then Naomi looked around the table. What are we waiting for? The board voted unanimously. Celina finally sat, then looked up. Good, she said. Then we begin now. Celina Hart stood once more. The resolution had passed. The power was no longer theoretical. It was hers. But she didn't celebrate. She didn't relax. There was still too much to do, and too many people watching. She looked around the boardroom, her tone calm but firmer now. We begin with accountability. The world is watching, not just because of what happened on that plane, but because of what we choose to do now. The board members nodded slowly. Most avoided eye contact. Some were already pulling up their calendars, preparing for emergency restructuring calls. A few understood this was history happening in real time. Celina clicked to the next slide. It was a list of names, employees tied to documented incidents over the last 18 months, instances of racial profiling, unjustified seat reassignments, complaints ignored. This is not just about one flight, she said. This is about a pattern, one that has quietly rotted the passenger experience from the inside. These are the names of people who contributed to that rot. Greg Maddox raised his eyebrows. Some of those employees are protected under union contracts. Celina looked him directly in the eye. They will be offered independent review, but the ones with repeat offenses are done, effective today. If we don't enforce consequences, our policies mean nothing. Greg nodded. He didn't argue again. Naomi Chen was already on her phone, texting the HR director. Across the table, one of the senior executives, a man named Rothman, cleared his throat. Will you be issuing the terminations personally? Celina didn't hesitate. Yes, starting now. She lifted her phone and opened a contact list marked Flight 408. The first call was to the base manager at Dulles International. This is Celina Hart. Please remove gate agent Philip Raleigh from all scheduling effective immediately. He is no longer authorized to interact with passengers. The manager's voice cracked in response. Yes, ma'am, right away. The second call went to flight operations. Supervisor Linda Crowley is suspended pending termination review. Revoke her badge access and log her out of internal systems. Each instruction was crisp, direct, final, back at the airport. Linda stood near baggage claim, her phone still in her hand. When the access revoked message flashed on her screen, her mouth fell open. She tapped it again, still locked out. Her stomach dropped. She looked at Kelsey Raymond, who was scrolling her own phone with trembling fingers. I'm locked out too, Kelsey whispered. Linda stared at her, the shock settling in like cold water. They had both assumed there would be time, a process, a meeting, a chance to explain. They hadn't realized that the system had already shifted beneath them. By the time Kelsey received the formal termination notice in her inbox, the story had already hit 3 national news outlets. BLACKCEO removed from business class, rewrites airline policy. Mid-Air Evolve Capital executes emergency clause on Horizon Airlines. Entire flight crew under review after passenger rights scandal in her hotel room. Amani Fields sat cross-legged on the bed, laptop open, phone buzzing non-stop. She had turned down 5 interviews that morning. She wasn't sure if she wanted to be the story or just tell it. She watched Celina's press briefing live from her laptop. The shot was framed simply, no flashy logos, just Celina in a gray blazer, seated behind a wooden table, calm, steady. Airlines often ask passengers to trust the process, she said. But what happens when the process itself is broken? When those in power are allowed to humiliate, silence, and diminish travelers based on race, language, or perceived class. She looked directly at the camera. That's what happened to me, and to too many others who don't have a boardroom waiting for them when they land. Amani felt a chill run down her arms. Celina continued, I'm not here to demand apologies. I'm here to build a better system, one that does not rely on power to protect dignity, but on policy, on principle. The live stream ended with a single message. Effective immediately. All Horizon staff interacting with passengers will undergo a 30-day recertification in equity, ethics, and emotional intelligence. No exceptions. Back at Horizon headquarters, Greg approached Celina outside the boardroom. We're getting calls from other airlines. Curious? Nervous? Celina nodded. They should be. He smiled weakly. And Brandon Keene's firm just issued a statement. They say he acted independently and that his behavior does not reflect their values. Celina tilted her head slightly. Did they issue an apology? Greg shook his head. No, just distance, Celina replied without emotion. Then I'll do the opposite. She walked down the hall and into a small conference room where a camera team waited. This was for internal use. Staff only. A direct message. When the recording began, she looked into the lens and said, to the crew members who stayed silent, who watched and did not speak up, you have a choice. You can continue standing in the shadow of this failure, or you can be part of the change. There is room in this new chapter, but only if you show up differently. She paused, then added, "I was removed from my seat, but I'm still here, still standing. And this time, I brought receipts." The video was sent to all 14,000 Horizon employees. By nightfall, union representatives requested a meeting. The FAA announced a collaborative inquiry, and passengers all over the country began sharing their own stories. The restructure had begun, not just in the halls of Horizon, but in the consciousness of the people they served. It started with a message, not from the press, not from the board, but from a mother in Kansas. Her name was Talia Monroe. She had flown Horizon 6 weeks earlier with her 8-year-old son, Elijah, who had been quietly asked to change seats because a frequent flyer preferred the window view. The boy had cried, confused. No explanation was given. Just a polite shrug from the flight attendant and the same forced smile Celina had come to recognize as a tool of dismissal. Talia never filed a complaint. She hadn't wanted trouble, but when she watched Celina's press conference, she sat down at her kitchen table and wrote what she hadn't been able to say. She ended the email with 5 words. "You made space for us." Celina read that line 3 times. The next morning, another message arrived. Then 50 more. A man from Detroit, a grandmother from Oakland, a college student from Miami who had been forced to check his violin on a full flight, even though a white passenger had brought 3 bags aboard. None of them had fought back at the time, but now they wrote. Their messages weren't angry. They were tired, grateful, seen. Celina responded to every single one personally. No copy-paste signatures, no pre-written replies, just her. That was the effect. The press had focused on the firings, the power plays, the restructuring. But what mattered more were the quiet echoes that followed. In the days after the incident, Horizon's social media department had been overwhelmed. They had prepared for backlash. They had not prepared for praise. Dozens of passengers wrote about their own small indignities on flights over the years, about how they'd felt invisible, about how a smile that came too late was just as painful as an insult said too loud. Then came the video clips. A man had recorded himself offering his first-class seat to a woman with a baby, adding the caption, "Trying to be part of the shift." Another clip showed a flight attendant pausing to kneel beside an elderly black woman, offering her water, asking if she wanted assistance deplaning. Small gestures, not revolutionary on their own, but together they signaled something bigger. Inside Horizon, the new compliance team worked overtime. Naomi Chen had rolled out Celina's 30-day recertification protocol across 6 regional hubs. Employees were resistant at first. Some rolled their eyes, some protested quietly in group chats. But the shift in public tone changed everything. This wasn't just about saving jobs, it was about earning trust. In a regional training room in Phoenix, a veteran flight attendant named Carla stood at the front of her class. She had been in the industry 22 years. She had seen its worst and its best, and, until now, she'd never believed it could change. That day, she told her training group, "I've escorted celebrities onto planes. I've upgraded rude executives. I've watched as we treated the wealthy like gold and ignored the woman in 23B carrying a sick child. And you know what? It's never felt good. Not once. I want to do better. So I'm staying, and I hope you will too." The room applauded. Word spread fast. In the executive wing back in Manhattan, Celina read over the internal reports. One stat stood out. Resignation rates among flight staff had dropped 10%. Retention among newly trained staff had risen 14. Passenger satisfaction was up, despite the media storm. She looked up from the numbers and let herself exhale. It was working. Still, not everything was going smoothly. There were lawsuits from former staff who claimed wrongful termination. Brandon Keene's PR firm attempted a rebranding campaign, only to have their stock drop 12 points in a week, and one of Horizon's smaller partners, an international leasing firm, hinted at withdrawal. Celina handled it all the same way she had handled the boardroom, steady, quiet, unshaken. One night, long after most of the office had cleared, Miles Hart called. His voice came through the speakerphone, warm and familiar. "You're not sleeping, are you?" Celina smiled, leaning back in her chair. "Define sleep. You know, Mom would have hated how much you work. Mom also used to iron the napkins." Touché. There was a pause. Then Miles added, more seriously, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't boarded that flight?" Celina thought for a moment. "No," she said, "because the system would have kept going. Unchanged, undisturbed. I was just the spark. The fuel was already there." Miles was quiet. Then he asked the question she hadn't said aloud. "But why you, Celina?" "Why always you?" Celina stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. "Because I could afford to stand up and still have a chair to sit in. Others don't have that luxury. I do." That night, she finally slept, not because the work was done, but because she knew it had begun. In a small airport lounge in Nashville, a gate agent printed out a boarding pass and double-checked it. The name matched. The seat was first class. She looked up at the teenage black girl standing in front of her with nervous eyes and a tightly clutched backpack. The agent smiled. "Welcome aboard. You're in 2A, window seat. Let me know if you need anything." The girl blinked, surprised. Her mother stood behind her, one hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Thank you," the mother whispered. The agent nodded. No cameras, no headlines, just dignity. That was the passenger effect, and it was spreading. Celina Hart was midway through reading a passenger policy audit when the call came in. Her assistant stepped into her office holding a secure line phone with both hands as if it were a rare artifact. "This one's from the Hill," she said softly. Celina took the handset and nodded once. "This is Hart," she said. A man's voice responded with a practiced calm. "Ms. Hart, this is Director Martin from the Department of Transportation. Secretary Langston has requested a closed-door briefing with you in Washington. Tomorrow morning, we'd like to discuss the ongoing reform measures you've initiated." Celina didn't flinch. What kind of briefing? One that's not public. Yet, there was a pause. Then Martin added with a slight chuckle, "They don't usually call private equity executives for these conversations." But then again, most private equity executives don't issue flight policy changes that make it into the Sunday morning briefings. Celina responded simply, "I'll be there." The next morning, the capital air was brisk, laced with early spring. Celina arrived in a tailored navy suit, walking quietly through the side entrance of the DOT building. No reporters, no flash, just a long hallway and a quiet elevator ride to the 5th floor. Inside the small conference room, 3 people waited. Secretary Langston was a tall, silver-haired woman with the eyes of someone who had spent decades reading between the lines. Beside her sat 2 aides, one with a thick folder and the other already recording notes on a digital pad. Langston stood and extended her hand. "Ms. Hart, thank you for coming. You've caused quite a stir." Celina smiled politely. "Sometimes stirring is necessary." Langston gestured to a seat across the table. "We've been monitoring the fallout from Horizon closely. Your restructuring has been efficient, unapologetic, and unusually well received by the public." Celina didn't respond immediately. She let the words settle. Langston continued. "What happened to you on that flight has happened to far too many Americans. You just happen to be one of the few with the authority to do something about it." Celina leaned forward. "I don't want to be the exception. I want to be the example." Langston's eyes lit up slightly. "That's exactly why you're here." She pushed a document across the table. "President Morgan is preparing to announce the formation of a Passenger Rights Council, an independent advisory group made up of legal, corporate, and passenger advocates. We want you to lead it." Celina glanced at the title page. National Passenger Equity Council Proposed Chair Celina Hart. Her fingers rested on the page without turning it. And what authority would it have? Langston didn't hesitate. Review and influence federal aviation policy. Coordinate with airlines on ethical training standards. Create national benchmarks for equity and customer treatment and enforcement. Langston paused. Recommendations, not mandates, at least for now. Celina gave a slow nod. "I would require full transparency in airline disciplinary data. You'd have it. I'd also need a civilian oversight panel, not just corporate voices." Langston folded her hands. "Build the structure as you see fit. That's why we're coming to you." Celina sat back for a moment, letting the offer breathe. She had spent years acquiring companies, navigating egos, delivering returns. But this was a seat at a different table, and for the first time in her career, she wasn't there to gain power. She was there to give it away. She looked at Langston again. "Then I accept." Langston smiled and closed the folder. "Welcome aboard." That evening, Celina returned to her apartment in Manhattan. It was nearly midnight. The city outside blinked softly through the windows, alive and constant. She stood in the living room for a while, just breathing. Then she opened her laptop and started typing. The subject line read, "To everyone who felt small." The email began simply, "I want to thank every passenger who has written to me these past few weeks. Your stories aren't background noise, they are the story." She described the council, the upcoming changes, the mission. But what she poured into the final paragraph was something deeper. "I was once taught that power should be invisible, that to lead well was to disappear behind results. But silence is not always strength. Sometimes silence is surrender, and I'm not interested in surrender." She pressed send, then sat in the dark for a long time. On the other side of the country, Amani Fields was editing a new video, not a takedown, not a viral burst of outrage, just a series of stories from everyday people, old cell phone clips, testimonials, simple footage from airports across America. She ended the video with Celina's voice. "I was removed from a seat, but I wasn't removed from my purpose. It hit 3 million views in 48 hours. At airports, passengers began asking gate agents about the Passenger Rights Council, flight crews, many of whom had rolled their eyes weeks earlier, now attended recertification trainings with sharpened attention. The change was no longer coming. It had landed." Celina received a final message that night. It was from an address she didn't recognize. The subject read, "I was 4B. The message said, "You don't know me. I was in 4B on your flight." I said nothing. I watched what happened. I told myself it wasn't my business. I just wanted a quiet flight. But I haven't stopped thinking about it. You gave me a front row seat to courage. Thank you. No name. Just that. Celina closed her laptop and smiled. Not every story needed a name. Some stories just needed to be heard. The jet bridge smelled of recycled air and coffee, familiar, neutral. But for Celina Hart, it held a weight she had not felt before. Her heel touched the metal threshold of the aircraft and she paused, just for a second. Not out of fear, not even memory, just reverence. This time, she wasn't boarding alone. As she stepped inside the aircraft, passengers were already seated. Some were scrolling their phones, some reading. A child played with a rubber dinosaur in row 6. The flight attendant at the front greeted her with a practiced smile. But as soon as he recognized her, the smile shifted. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Hart. Thank you for flying with us today." Celina nodded gently. "Thank you, Marcus." He blinked, surprised she knew his name. Then he remembered. Of course she did. Celina walked down the aisle, her carry-on gliding quietly beside her. The other passengers began to take notice, not because she made noise, but because presence rarely needed volume. She reached seat 2A and stood for a moment. This was the seat she had been denied weeks ago, the window seat that had been taken for the sake of someone louder, whiter, more entitled. Now it was hers again, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it with grace. She sat slowly, then opened the small leather notebook in her lap. It was filled with handwritten notes from passengers, staff, even children who had seen the viral videos. One letter stood out. It was from a 10-year-old girl named Aliyah in Atlanta. She wrote in blue marker, uneven letters stretching across the page. "I saw your video. I want to be a captain one day. I am black and smart and nice. Thank you for showing people like me that we are big." Celina had read it over 20 times. Still, it made her chest ache in the best way. The cabin door closed. The pilot's voice came through the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Horizon Flight 721 to Seattle. Today's flight will be just over 5 hours. And before we take off, I want to personally acknowledge someone special on board, Ms. Celina Hart, on behalf of the crew. Thank you. You didn't just change a policy. You changed how we fly." The cabin broke into spontaneous applause. Celina looked around, humbled but still grounded. She didn't wave. She didn't stand. She just nodded once, eyes misting slightly. Beside her, in seat 2B, a young man in his 20s leaned over. "My mom cried when she watched your speech," he said. "She's been a flight attendant for 19 years. Said no one ever stood up for them like that." Celina smiled. "She deserved better long before I showed up." The plane lifted. Outside the window, clouds drifted past like unspoken thoughts. Halfway through the flight, a woman from economy class walked up the aisle holding a small folded note. She stood beside Celina, uncertain. "I'm sorry. I know this is weird," she said quietly. I wanted to say thank you. My father was removed from a flight in 2011 because of his accent. I never forgot it." Celina took the note gently. "You're not weird. You're part of the story now." The woman nodded, her lip trembling, and returned to her seat. Later, when drinks were being served, The flight attendant, Marcus, stopped at Celina's row and handed her something not on the cart. It was a handwritten card. On the front was the Horizon logo. Inside, dozens of crew signatures. The message read, "You gave us back our dignity. We promise to protect it." Celina closed the card softly. She thought of her mother, the woman who had taught her to iron napkins because no detail was ever too small. She thought of the young Celina, sitting at an airport terminal in Baltimore, watching other families fly away to lives that seemed shinier. She thought of every person who had been told they didn't belong in a seat they paid for. Not anymore. When the plane landed in Seattle, Celina waited until the aisle was clear before standing. She walked out with the same calm stride she had always carried, but everything had changed. At the gate, an airline executive was waiting. He offered his hand. "We've reviewed your Passenger Equity Council proposal. All of it. We're in." Celina shook his hand firmly. "Good. There's work to do." Outside, Seattle greeted her with cool wind and open sky. At baggage claim, an older black man stood off to the side wearing a faded pilot's jacket. He approached slowly. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I used to fly for Northwest before the merger. Retired now. I just wanted to say, I've seen a lot in this industry, but I've never seen someone fix it from the inside." Celina reached out and took his hand. "Maybe now we'll get it right." He nodded once. "My granddaughter wants to be a flight engineer. I'll tell her she can." She smiled. "Tell her she already is." That night, in her hotel room, Celina finally opened the note from the woman on the plane. It was short. Just a single sentence. "You reminded me that silence is not safety." Celina set the note down, picked up her pen, and began drafting the Passenger Equity Council's first report. Her first line, "Equity does not arrive quietly. It lands with intention." Outside, planes lifted and landed under a sky that finally felt more just. Celina Hart had not just taken her seat back, she had made room for millions more. She didn't yell, she didn't threaten, she didn't even raise her voice. But in the quiet power of her grace, Celina Hart did something that shook an entire system. She reminded the world that dignity is not granted by uniforms or titles. It is a right that cannot be taken, even at 35,000 feet. Because this was never just about a seat. It was about every black traveler who has been doubted, dismissed, or quietly displaced. It was about the child who wonders if they belong in the first row, the parent who is too tired to argue, the worker who's told to stay quiet, the passenger who watches injustice and doesn't know what to do. Celina stood for them, and because she did, the skies are no longer the same, but the work is far from over. Discrimination doesn't need to shout it oft in whispers, cloaked in policies and smiles, and unless we keep shining a light, it will keep boarding unnoticed. So ask yourself, if you were on that flight, would you have stood up? If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe, because the next story could be yours. And together, we can make sure that every passenger, no matter their skin, voice, or seat, flies with the dignity they deserve. Stay tuned. The skies are changing.